This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. Squarespace makes it easy to create a beautiful website.
February 13th, 1866, two men walked into the Clay County Savings Association, a bank in Liberty, Missouri, pulled out their pistols, and demanded money. With their accomplices, they made off with a huge sum in gold, silver, and bonds. It was a bank robbery that could have come straight out of a Wild West movie, except that it might have been the very first such bank robbery in American history. And it might or might not have been pulled off by some of America's most famous bank robbers. And in any case, it is history that deserves to be remembered. Thank you, Squarespace, for sponsoring this episode of The History Guy. If you don't think you need a website, of course you need a website. Everybody needs a website. It says who you are, and it allows you to do important things like, say, take payments so that you can sell things, or maybe take in charitable donations for a charitable cause. If you don't have a good website, it's probably because you either think it's too expensive to pay someone else to do it, or just too hard to do it yourself.
But there is a better option. Squarespace is the all in one website platform that makes it easy to create a custom visual identity and connect the features that you need. Check out Acuity Scheduling, which sets you up to accept client bookings, or Squarespace Courses, which has the tools that you need to create and sell your own online course. I jumped on and was able to start creating a page right away. It's easy, it's actually a lot of fun, and it's affordable.
You deserve a website that deserves to be remembered. So go see how easy it is. Go to squarespace.com for a free trial. And then when you are ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/thehistoryguy and use the code thehistoryguy, and you'll get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain.
As would be expected, there is some disagreement over the exact events in Liberty, Missouri on February 13th, 1866, but a summary is given in an 1885 history of Platte and Clay counties. On Tuesday, February 13th, 1866, the bank of the Clay County Savings Association at Liberty was robbed of about $60,000 by a band of brigands, presumably from Jackson County, although it has since been ascertained that some of the members resided in Clay. At the same time and incident to the robbery, a young man named George Wymore, a student on his way to a school, was without any sort of provocation whatever, inhumanely and mercilessly shot down by the robbers and instantly killed. County history then quotes the Clay County Tribune. It appears that in the afternoon, some 10 or 12 persons rode into town, and two of them went into the Clay County Savings Bank and asked the clerk, Mr. William Byrd, to change a $10 bill. As he started to do so, they drew their revolvers on him and his father, Mr. Greenup Bird, the cashier, and made them stand quiet while they proceeded to rob the bank. After having obtained what they supposed was all, they put the clerk and cashier in the vault, and no doubt thought that they had locked the door, and went out with their stolen treasure, mounted their horses, and were joined by the balance of their gang and commenced shooting. Mr. S. H. Holmes had two shots fired at him, and young George Wymore, aged about 19 years, son of William H. Wymore, one of the most peaceable and promising young men in the county, was shot and killed while standing on the opposite side of the street at the corner of the old green house. As to the perpetrators, the Tribune writes, the murderers and robbers are believed by many citizens and the officers of the bank to be a gang of old bushwhacking desperadoes who stay mostly in Jackson County. But it makes no difference who they are or what they claim to be. They should be swung up in the most summary manner. Robbing and murdering must be stopped, and if it requires severe medicine to do it, so be it. While the group was pursued by a posse of citizens, the history of the county's writes, heavy snow fell within a few hours after the robbery, covering up the tracks of the robbers completely and rendering it impossible to follow their trail far. It was learned positively, however, that they crossed the river into Jackson County and scattered themselves through the Cracker's Neck region and amid the utmost impenetrable fastness of the Snee Hills. As to the details, there were some differences among the reports at the time, but the significance of the crime was noted at the time. The history of the counties explains. This was in all probability really the heaviest bank robbing that occurred during the reign of robbers in Missouri, Iowa, and Kentucky from 1866 to 1881. Despite assertions in sensational publications to the contrary, it is quite certain that no other bank was ever robbed by the Missouri bandits of so large a sum as ever $50,000.
It was a very successful robbery, more than $60,000 in gold, silver, and bonds, worth well over $1 million today. In fact, one of the great mysteries of the robbery is what happened to all that money. Out of that huge sum, not even a single silver dollar was ever recovered.
But the robbery might have been the first of its kind. It is today generally considered to be the first successful daylight bank robbery in the United States during peacetime. That seems like a lot of qualifiers, but it's significant. There are numerous records of bank robberies prior to the Civil War. Some have even been the focus of other episodes of the History Guy, but these, though called bank robberies in the press, were actually what would be more properly called a burglary. Bank robberies are described as occurring while the bank was closed, most commonly by the theft or copying of the bank keys, but also by tunneling. I'm always cautious about saying first, but I can find no account prior to the Civil War of the movie trope of walking into a bank and saying, "Stick 'em up." The significance of the crime shows in the fact that the robbery in tiny, distant Liberty, Missouri was reported in the New York Times. Furthermore, that model would then become popular, both in the Wild West and today. If the robbery of the Clay County Savings Association was not the very first, it seems to have started a trend that would be associated not only with some of the most well known outlaws of the Wild West, but also gangsters and criminals to this day. 2,469 robberies of banks and savings and loans were reported in the United States in 2023. Most commonly, those are daylight robberies, although less violent than the Liberty robbery, usually done by passing a note to a teller. Only about 1% of bank robberies in the U.S. result in deaths. But presumably, the robbers of the Clay County Savings Association were new at the trade, what with it never having been done before. But that is one of the points of disagreement in the stories. The Tribune wrote that the killing was a deliberate murder without any provocation whatever, for neither Mr. Wymore nor any of the citizens of town previous to the shooting knew anything of what had taken place. But the Columbia, Missouri Herald Statesman reported that Mr. Bird put his head out the window and gave the alarm. A boy across the street named Wymore, who repeated the alarm, was shot 5 times, once through the heart and instantly killed. The Gallatin North Missourian tells a different story, saying that Wymore was killed accidentally in an attempt to kill another man before the robbery. The question of whether the young College of William and Jewel student was shot without provocation, or was shot to prevent him shooting the alarm, or was shot by accident might seem unimportant, but it also might play a role in one of the enduring questions of the robbery. There are other disparities. While most accounts say that $60,000 was taken, some claim that it was 72,000. Others say as little as 50,000. Most accounts say that there were a dozen men involved, but some say 13, and at least one said 7. The Gallatin North Missourian says that the men were wearing false whiskers, beards, wigs, and other disguises, something not included in other accounts. The Columbia Herald Statesman mentioned the detail that the townspeople were distracted by an interesting trial at the Justice Court. Several accounts use the term bushwhacker. The term was used in the headline of the New York Times story. The St. Louis Globe Democrat said that the crime was committed by bushwhackers who crossed into the county. The term referred to Confederate guerrillas, and they had a history in Clay County. The Kansas City Public Library explains the bushwhackers were Missourians who fled to the rugged backcountry and forests to live in hiding and resist the Union occupation of the border counties. They fought Union patrols, typically by ambush, in countless small skirmishes and hit and run engagements. These guerrilla fighters harassed, robbed, and sometimes murdered loyal Unionist farmers on both sides of the state line. They interrupted the federal mail and telegraph communications, and, most troublesome to the Union command trying to quell the escalating violence in the border region, the bushwhackers held the popular support of many local farming families. If they sounded fierce or cruel, realize that most every bushwhacker had their own story of how they had been mistreated that spurred them to enlist. It was a brutal time, with no love lost nor often quarter given between bushwhackers and Federals. Brad Pace of the Jackson County Historical Society writes, service as a guerrilla meant a fighter could remain near his home and maintain a certain degree of independence, but they were not afforded the protections given to regular combatants, and they were subject to arrest or even summary execution. And western Missouri was ravaged by one of the most notorious bands of bushwhackers, Quantrill's Raiders, led by Captain William Quantrill, most remembered for their 1863 attack on Lawrence, Kansas. Many of Quantrill's men were from Missouri and Clay County specifically, and they quickly fell under suspicion. The Topeka Capital Journal Online wrote, at least 6 of the robbers had been recognized. They had all rode with Quantrill during the war. Pace lists the men witnesses initially identified as Oliver Shepard, Bud and Donnie Pence, Frank Gregg, Jim and Bill Wickerson, and Joab Perry. There were many reasons that former Confederate rebels might be turning to robbery. Chris Bunton, writing on the true crime site The Yard, explains that in those days after the war ended, anyone who fought for or supported the Confederacy were disenfranchised. They couldn't vote, run for office, or hold positions. They were blacklisted from selling goods at market and often had land taken away or were unable to buy land. People didn't sell or buy from them. Pace writes former guerrilla fighters were presumed disloyal and considered the lowest of the low. That is, bushwhackers had few options. They were also violent men, used to war, and many of them were unreconstructed. To them, the war was not over. And they were, Bunton notes, still waging war against the rich northern oppressors. Pace writes, it is said that in Missouri the Civil War came early and stayed late. Ex-guerrilla fighters, many of them who have known nothing but conflict, struggled to put the war behind them. Facing a bleak future and barriers to assimilation, some chose a seamless transition to outlaw, targeting banks and railroads typically owned by Eastern or pro-Union interests. That may have been why the Clay County Savings Association was targeted. The Clay County Bank was owned by pro-Northern Republican Party members. If the robbers were bushwhackers, that might mean something. Clay County had been generally more Confederate than Union supporting, and people may well have recognized the robbers, but not been willing to say out of loyalty or fear of retaliation. The county history notes it was almost wholly a matter of conjecture who they were. One man who met them declared that he knew some of them, but afterwards he refused to swear to his statement. The website Legends of America notes that suspicion quickly fell on a former guerrilla leader named Archie Clement, who had ridden with Quantrell and taken part in the attack on Lawrence. He had then ridden with one of Quantrell's captains, William Bloody Bill Anderson, apparently taking command of Anderson's group after Anderson's death in October of 1864. Legends of America writes that Clement was thought to be the leader of the men responsible for the Liberty Bank robbery. The allegation was never proven, as Clement died in a gunfight when members of the Missouri State Guard tried to arrest him for the crime. The county history notes another suspect. A fellow named Joab Perry, who was lying in Independence Jail on another charge, was taken out by the Clay County officials and brought across the river for examination, but he escaped from custody and was never afterwards arrested. Perry also rode with Quantrill and Bloody Bill, and the escape so casually mentioned actually included the murder of Jackson County Sheriff Henry Bugler, a murder that was never solved. Perry had been freed by a group of men whom Pace assumes had participated in the Clay County bank robbery. Pace opines that the robbers may have wanted him free so he could rejoin their crew, but also, if he had indeed been along with the robbery, then he would have had valuable information to trade with the prosecutor in exchange for amended charges or reduced sentence for himself. Pace concludes, although most historical sources do suggest that Perry was involved in the Clay County Savings Association robbery, we will never know this for sure. But what we do know for certain is that he was a credentialed ex-bushwhacker and well-connected in guerrilla outlaw circles. Which leads to the question that has more fascinated historians. If the Clay County bank robbery was carried out by former bushwhackers who rode with Quantrill and Bloody Bill, might it have included two of the most famous among those? Clay County residents, Frank and Jesse James. Many simply assume their involvement. Missouri Life magazine wrote in 2024, the infamous outlaw Jesse James robbed a bank in Liberty on this date in 1866. James and his gang, known as the James Younger Gang, targeted the Clay County Savings Association in Liberty. But the Kansas City Public Library notes that some historians question the association of the James brothers with the robbery at the Clay County Savings Association Bank at Liberty. They write that the first robbery in which there is general agreement that the James brothers participated was the Daviess County Savings Association at Gallatin, Missouri on December 7, 1869. PBS's American Experience says only that the culprits who got away after killing a passerby were assumed to be ex-bushwhackers, and the James brothers may have been among them. In May of 1865, Jesse James was attempting to surrender after the end of the war, and he was shot through the lung by Union troops. The wound was very near to another spot where he had been shot during the war. The bullet was never removed. It is extraordinary, given the times, that he survived being shot through the chest twice. But it does lead author Johnny D. Boggs, writing in True West magazine, to question, could Jesse, still recuperating from a bullet through his lung, have taken part in a robbery during a bitterly cold February day? Boggs notes that some historians put Cole Younger and Frank there, but the fact is that we just aren't certain. Bunton writes, it is said that Frank was in Texas and Jesse was sick, perhaps still recovering from a chest wound. No one can prove either way. When a crime is committed, people will form alibis.
After the robbery, the Columbia Herald spokesman opined that the determination to capture and hang the culprits is so universal that it's thought that they cannot escape. How ironic, then, that 159 years later we still don't know with certainty who did it, and no one was ever charged with the robbery, nor with the murder of Sheriff Bugler. Bunton argues that the James brothers might have been particularly unwilling to claim this particular robbery because the outrage of the murder of 19-year-old George Wymore, who might have been killed by Clement. And of course, their notoriety today is such that people will attribute crimes to the James brothers, even if they weren't involved. If they weren't involved, though, it seems very likely that the crime was committed by former compatriots in the Confederate Army with whom they probably associated later in their future crimes. And if they were involved, it was by far their most lucrative bank robbery of their career. The Clay County Savings Association was unable to recover. They settled with their account holders for 60 cents on the dollar and folded. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community and locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop, book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.